A homeless man, struggling to survive, accepts an unexpected offer to repair a rundown cabin in exchange for food and shelter. Grateful for any chance, he pours his heart into every repair, while his mysterious employer watches with growing fascination. What he doesn't know is that she's actually a billionaire in disguise, searching for something her vast fortune could never buy. As she studies his unwavering kindness and craftsmanship, she discovers the authentic connection she's been yearning for. But when her true identity finally comes to light, everything changes. Because sometimes life's most valuable lessons come from those who have nothing left except their integrity and heart. Will her billions mean anything when she realizes the true richness lies in the genuine connection they've built? Or will her deception destroy the very thing she was searching for? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The bitter morning wind cut through Tom's worn jacket as he made his way down Mason Street, his trusty toolbox heavy in his calloused hands. It wasn't much, this collection of rescued tools from pawn shops and dumpsters, but it represented everything he had left from his former life. 6 months ago, he'd owned a thriving carpentry business. Now these tools were his only chance at earning enough for his next meal. He paused outside Eddie's diner, the same place he'd been studying. For the past week, the front door squeaked painfully every time it opened, making customers wince and hurting Eddie's business. Tom knew he could fix it in under an hour with the right tools that were right here in his box. The morning rush was starting to die down when Tom gathered his courage and pushed through that squeaking door. The warm air inside carried the scent of coffee and bacon, making his stomach growl. Eddie, a burly man with kind eyes, looked up from wiping down the counter. "Sir," Tom called out, his voice hoarse from disuse, "I noticed your door needs fixing. I can help with that. Was a carpenter for 20 years before—" He trailed off, not needing to finish the sentence. His appearance told the rest of the story. Eddie studied him for a long moment, taking in the worn clothes and weathered face, but also noting the professional-grade tools visible in the open box. "What would you charge?" "Breakfast," Tom replied simply, "and maybe a cup of coffee while I work." 20 minutes later, Tom's hands moved with practiced precision as he adjusted the door's hinges. His movements were efficient, muscle memory from thousands of similar repairs guiding every motion. As he worked, his mind drifted to his old workshop, filled with the scent of sawdust and the satisfaction of creating beautiful things from raw wood. The door's transformation took exactly 47 minutes. When Tom finished, it opened and closed silently, like a well-oiled machine. Eddie, who had been watching between serving customers, tested it himself several times, his face breaking into an impressed smile. "I've been meaning to fix this damn thing for months," Eddie admitted, leading Tom to a quiet booth. "Sit, you've earned more than just breakfast." The plate Eddie set before him was piled high with eggs, bacon, and hash browns. Tom forced himself to eat slowly, savoring each bite, knowing it might be his only real meal of the day. As he ate, he watched other customers coming and going, the door now swinging smoothly on its hinges. Each silent opening was a small reminder that he could still create something of value, even if his life had fallen apart. A young woman in a business suit caught his eye as she walked in, not because of her obvious wealth, but because she stopped to examine the door with unusual interest. She tested it several times, looking puzzled before taking a seat at the counter. Tom didn't know it then, but this woman's attention to his handiwork would soon change everything. For now, though, he simply finished his meal, thanked Eddie sincerely, and stepped back onto the street. His toolbox felt lighter somehow, despite its weight. He'd made something better today, proved his worth, even if just to himself. It wasn't much, but in a world that had taken everything from him, it was something to hold on to. Tom returned to Eddie's diner the next morning, not for another meal. He wouldn't impose on the man's kindness, but because the area felt safer than his usual spots. He sat on a nearby bench, watching people hurry past with their coffee cups and phones, wondering if any of them had noticed the door's smooth swing. The woman in the business suit appeared again, this time wearing casual clothes that somehow still looked expensive. She paused at the diner's entrance, her hand lingering on the door handle. Then, to Tom's surprise, she walked directly toward him. "You fixed the door, didn't you?" Her voice was gentle but confident. Up close, he noticed she wore no jewelry, except a simple silver watch. Tom gripped his toolbox tighter. "Yes, ma'am. Eddie was kind enough to trade the work for a meal." She sat down beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm Sarah. I've been watching you for a few days, actually. Yesterday, I saw you help Mrs. Chen prop up her vegetable stand when one of the legs broke. Before that, you fixed the Williams' kid's bicycle chain." Tom shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't realized anyone had noticed these small acts. "Just trying to be useful, Mom." "Sarah," she corrected softly, "and being useful is exactly what I'm interested in." She gestured to his toolbox. "You're clearly skilled. A professional carpenter." "Was," Tom nodded, the word bitter in his mouth. 20 years of experience, my own business, until medical bills and a bad investment took it all." Sarah's eyes showed no pity, only interest. "I have a proposition for you. I own a cabin about an hour from here. It's been in my family for generations, but it's fallen into disrepair. I need someone with real carpentry skills to restore it." Tom waited for the catch. There was always a catch. "I'm offering room and board, plus a fair wage for however long the repairs take," she continued. "The cabin has a working bathroom, kitchen, heat. You'd have your own space, and I'd provide all the materials needed." It sounded too good to be true. "Why me? Why not hire a contractor?" Sarah's expression softened. "Because I've seen how you work. You care about doing things right. That door, you didn't just fix it, you restored it. The bicycle chain, you taught those kids how to maintain it themselves. That's the kind of care this cabin needs." Tom stared at his hands, rough and cracked from exposure. "A real job, a real bed, regular meals." But something didn't add up. "The cabin, you live." "There, I visit regularly," she said, a slight hesitation in her voice. "I'm often there working on my laptop. It's a quiet place to think." A gust of wind made Tom pull his jacket tighter. Winter was coming. His chances of surviving another season on the streets. "Could I see it first?" he asked cautiously. Sarah's face brightened. "Of course. My car's just around the corner. We can go now if you'd like." Tom looked at Eddie's diner, at the door he'd fixed, then at his reflection in a nearby window. A ghost of his former self. Sometimes, he thought, life offers a chance just when you're about to give up hope. "Okay," he said finally. "Show me. This cabin of yours." The drive took them out of the city, past suburbs and into rolling countryside. Sarah's car was nice but not flashy, like everything else about her. She drove with quiet confidence, occasionally pointing out landmarks. Tom watched the city fade away, his toolbox secure in his lap, wondering if he was making the biggest mistake of his life or accepting its greatest blessing. When they turned onto a dirt road, Sarah slowed the car. "Almost there. Just remember, it needs a lot of work. But I think you'll see its potential." Through the trees, Tom caught his first glimpse of what would become either his salvation or his undoing, not yet knowing that this mysterious woman beside him would change his life in ways he could never imagine. The cabin emerged from the tree line like a forgotten memory. 2 stories of weathered wood and broken dreams stood before them, its windows clouded with age and neglect. Tom's trained eye immediately catalogued the issues: sagging roof, rotted, porch boards, gutters, hanging at dangerous angles. Yet beneath the decay, he saw the bones of something beautiful. "It's been empty for about 5 years, Sarah explained, her voice carrying a hint of apology. "My grandmother was the last one to live here regularly. Tom set his toolbox down on a relatively stable portion of the porch, running his hand along the wooden railing. "Old-growth cedar," he murmured. "You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore." Despite its condition, he could tell the cabin had been built with love and skill. Sarah watched him intently as he conducted his initial inspection. "Can it be saved?" "Everything can be saved with enough care," Tom replied, already mentally cataloguing the repairs needed. "Though I have to ask, wouldn't it be cheaper to tear it down and build new?" A shadow crossed Sarah's face. "Some things are worth more than money," she said quietly. "This place, it holds memories." Tom nodded, understanding more than she might have expected. He'd learned the hard way that memories were often all you had left. They entered the cabin together, floorboards creaking beneath their feet. The interior was surprisingly clean, if sparse. A basic kitchen setup, some furniture draped in sheets, and stairs leading to what Sarah explained were 2 bedrooms upstairs. "I had the utilities reconnected last week," she said, flipping a light. "Switch to demonstrate. Water, electricity, heat, they all work, and I stocked the kitchen with basics." She paused, seeming almost nervous. "Will you take the job?" Tom stood in the center of the main room, taking it all in. The craftsmanship, visible beneath years of neglect, called to something deep within him. This wasn't just another repair job. This was a chance to restore something precious, to make something broken whole again. "Yes," he said finally, "but we should discuss specifics. What exactly are you expecting?" Sarah pulled out a notebook and pen from her bag. "Let's make a list. You tell me what needs to be done, and we'll prioritize." For the next hour, they walked through the cabin together, Tom pointing out issues both major and minor. Sarah took detailed notes, asking surprisingly knowledgeable questions about some things while displaying complete ignorance about others. It was an odd contrast that Tom filed away in his mind, but didn't mention. "The roof needs to be our first priority," he explained, pointing to water stains on the ceiling. "Winter's coming, and everything we do inside won't matter if we can't keep the weather out." "How long do you think it will all take?" Sarah asked, reviewing her notes. Tom considered carefully. 3 months minimum. Could be longer depending on what we find once we start opening things up. Old houses like this tend to hide their problems." "That's fine," Sarah said quickly, almost too quickly. "Take whatever time you need to do it right. I'll make sure you have all the materials and tools you need." As the afternoon light began to fade, Sarah showed him to what would be his room, the smaller of the 2 upstairs bedrooms, but with a comfortable-looking bed and a window overlooking the surrounding forest. "I'll bring more supplies tomorrow," she said. "Will you be okay here tonight? There's food downstairs, clean towels in the bathroom, and extra blankets in the closet." Tom set his toolbox down beside the bed, the sum total of his worldly possessions. "I'll be fine," he assured her, fighting back unexpected emotion. After months of sleeping rough, the simple bedroom felt like a palace. Sarah lingered in the doorway. "I usually work here during the days," she said, "on my laptop, but I'll try not to disturb you." "It's your cabin," Tom reminded her. "You can do what you want." After she left, Tom sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the sound of her car disappearing down the dirt road. The cabin creaked and settled around him, speaking in the language of old houses. Despite its condition, it felt more like a home than anywhere he'd been in months. He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering about Sarah and her mysterious cabin. Something didn't quite add up about her story, but right now, with a real roof over his head and the promise of honest work ahead, he decided that maybe it didn't matter. The first week passed in a blur of activity. Tom threw himself into the work with the dedication of a man given a second chance at life. Each morning he woke before dawn, his body remembering the rhythm of honest labor. The simple pleasure of having a hot shower and coffee maker felt like luxury after months on the streets. Sarah arrived each day around 9, carrying her laptop, and what Tom soon realized was designer coffee she pretended came from a local shop. She set up at the kitchen, table, alternating between intense focus on her computer and watching Tom work with poorly concealed fascination. "Hand me that pry bar," Tom asked on the third day, as he carefully removed damaged shingles from the roof. To his surprise, Sarah scrambled up the ladder to help, though she held the tool like it might bite her. "Like this?" she asked, her uncertainty at odds with her usual confidence. Tom couldn't help but smile. "When's the last time you did any manual labor?" She hesitated, then laughed softly. "Is it that obvious?" "Your hands." He nodded toward her perfectly manicured nails. "They've never seen a day's work." Something flickered across her face. Guilt, perhaps, but she covered it quickly. "Then teach me, I want to help." So he did. He showed her how to hold tools properly, how to recognize different types of wood, how to read the story of water damage in the grain. She proved to be a quick study, though she occasionally slipped, referring to common hardware store items by their technical manufacturing names, or showing surprise at the cost of basic materials when they made supply lists. The mysteries surrounding Sarah grew daily. She'd take private phone calls in rapid-fire business language that didn't match her story of managing a small online business. Her laptop bore no company logos, but Tom caught glimpses of complex financial documents on her screen. Yet there was no denying the genuine joy she showed in learning to use a hammer properly, or the pride in her face when she successfully replaced her first board. On the fifth day, as they broke for lunch, Sarah had brought sandwiches from town that cost more than Tom used to spend on dinner. She asked about his past. "Your work," she said, gesturing to the newly repaired section of roof. "It's clearly professional. How did you end up homeless?" Tom finished for her. He'd been expecting this question. "Had my own business for 15 years, 12 employees. Then my wife got sick, cancer. Insurance covered some, but not the experimental treatments. I sold everything, mortgaged. Everything didn't help. After she died, one bad investment trying to save the business took everything else." Sarah's face showed understanding rather than pity. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "About your wife?" Tom nodded, appreciating her directness. "Mary would have liked this place," he said, surprising himself by sharing this. "She always wanted a cabin in the woods." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle tapping of Sarah's fingers on her laptop keyboard. Tom returned to work, losing himself in the familiar motions of repair and restoration. That evening, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, they discovered the extent of the cabin's structural issues. Water had penetrated deeper into the western wall than initially suspected, compromising a main support beam. "This is bad," Tom said, probing the soft wood with experienced fingers. "We need to stabilize this immediately." "Storm's coming." Sarah's face paled at his tone. "What do we need?" "Extra lumber, supports, tarps." Tom began listing items, but Sarah was already on her phone, speaking in that crisp business tone he'd come to recognize. Within an hour, despite the approaching darkness, a truck arrived with everything they needed and more. The driver, looking somewhat bewildered, helped them unload and left quickly. Tom noted that Sarah had paid in cash, but he was too focused on the urgent repairs to dwell on this oddity. They worked side by side into the night, Sarah holding the flashlight and passing tools as Tom raced to reinforce the wall before the storm hit. Her questions grew more confident, showing she'd been paying attention to his lessons all week. The storm broke just as they finished, rain hammering against the roof they'd partially repaired. They stood together at the window, watching lightning illuminate the forest. "We did it," Sarah said softly, genuine pride in her voice. "We actually did it." Tom looked at her then, really looked at her. In the dim light, with rain streaking the windows behind her, she seemed different. Her carefully maintained facade had slipped, revealing someone who appeared both stronger and more vulnerable than the woman who'd approached him at the diner. "Yeah," he agreed, "we did." And he realized that somehow during this week of work and quiet conversations, he'd started to trust her, even knowing she wasn't exactly who she claimed to be. The morning after the storm found them sharing coffee on the newly reinforced porch, watching the sunrise paint the wet forest in shades of gold. Tom had been up since dawn, checking their emergency repairs, pleased to find everything had held. "Tell me about your best project," Sarah said suddenly, cradling her coffee cup. "From before, when you had your business." Tom leaned back, memories washing over him. There was this historic theatre downtown, built in 1902, all hand-carved woodwork. They wanted to modernize it, but keep the original character, spent 6 months just on the restoration. His eyes lit up with pride. Every detail mattered. The crown molding alone took weeks to match perfectly. "You miss it," Sarah observed softly. "Every day." Tom ran a hand along the porch railing. "But this feels right too. Sometimes starting over isn't the worst thing." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I understand that better than you might think." She stood, walking to the railing. "Everyone sees what they expect to see. The story they think makes sense. Like a wealthy woman choosing to live in a broken-down cabin," Tom ventured carefully. She turned to him startled, then laughed. "Am I that obvious?" "Your coffee costs more than my old hourly rate," he said, with a slight smile. "And I've never met anyone who pays cash for rush-delivered lumber at night." Instead of denying it, Sarah sat back down. "My family has money," she admitted, "but this cabin, it's the only place that feels real sometimes. My grandmother taught me to make bread in that kitchen. My grandfather would read stories by the fireplace. Out here, nobody expects anything from me except what I choose to give." Tom nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. "Why tell me this now?" "Because you shared your story," she said simply, "and because I need you to understand why this place matters. It's not just a building to me." They spent the morning working on the interior, Tom teaching Sarah the basics of wood restoration. Her questions were thoughtful, and her determination to learn touched something in him. When she finally managed to properly sand and restore a small section of window frame, her joy was genuine and infectious. "Look," she exclaimed, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "It's like it's coming back to life." "That's the thing about good wood," Tom explained, examining her work. "It wants to be beautiful, just needs someone to care enough to bring it out." Sarah's phone buzzed then. It had been buzzing all morning, but she'd been ignoring it. This time, however, her face changed when she glanced at the screen. "I need to take this," she said, stepping outside. Through the window, Tom could see her pacing, her voice carrying the sharp tone of authority he'd come to recognize. Words like shareholders and board approval drifted in on the breeze. When she returned, there was tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. She attacked her next restoration attempt with unusual intensity, as if trying to sand away more than just old varnish. "You know," Tom said carefully, watching her work, "whatever you're running from, or towards, this place is good for that. Mary used to say working with wood was better than therapy. Something about the honesty of it." Sarah's movement slowed. "Your wife sounds like she was wise." She was. Tom picked up his own tools, joining her at the window frame. "She also used to say that secrets are like termites. They eat away at things from the inside until the structure can't hold." Sarah's hands stilled completely. For a long moment, she stared at the partially restored wood beneath her fingers. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Some secrets protect people." "Do they?" Tom asked gently. "Or do they just protect us from facing things we're afraid of?" Before Sarah could respond, a truck rumbled up the drive. Locals from town, delivering more supplies. Tom watched as Sarah quickly composed herself, slipping back into her role of casual cabin owner. But now there was a weight between them, an acknowledgement of deeper currents running beneath their simple arrangement. As they unloaded lumber and tools, Tom caught fragments of gossip from the delivery men. They were curious about the mysterious woman and her hired help, wondering about their story. Tom almost smiled at their speculation. The truth, he suspected, was far more interesting than anything they could imagine. That evening, As shadows lengthened across the newly restored sections of their work, Sarah lingered longer than usual. Before leaving, she stood in the doorway, seeming to wrestle with something unsaid. "Tom," she finally spoke, "thank you, not just for the work, but for understanding." He nodded, recognizing the cost of even that small admission. "We all have our stories, Sarah. Sometimes the ones we don't tell say more than the ones we do." After she left, Tom sat on the porch, listening to the night sounds of the forest. The cabin felt different now, as if their shared confidences had somehow seeped into its very walls, making it more than just a structure of wood and nails. It was becoming something else, a place of renewal, not just for the building, but perhaps for both of them. Sarah arrived earlier than usual the next morning, carrying 2 paper cups of her expensive coffee. She found Tom already at work, carefully measuring boards for the living room floor. Without a word, she handed him a cup and settled into what had become her usual spot at the kitchen table. But today, her laptop remained closed. "You're staring," Tom said, without looking up from his work. "I'm observing," she corrected, a smile in her voice. "There's a difference." "And what are you observing?" "How at peace you look when you work." She moved closer, watching his hands as they worked the measuring tape. "It's like you forget everything else exists." Tom paused, considering her words. "Work like this. It demands presence. You can't think about yesterday or worry about tomorrow when you're making precise cuts. The wood doesn't care about your problems. It only cares about right. Now, must be nice," Sarah murmured almost to herself. Her phone buzzed again. It seemed to buzz constantly these days, but for once she didn't even glance at it. Instead, she knelt beside him, careful to keep her designer jeans out of the sawdust. "Show me what you're doing," Tom found himself, explaining the importance of proper measurements, the way wood expands and contracts with temperature and humidity, the secret language of grain patterns. Sarah listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed both her intelligence and her complete unfamiliarity with physical labor. "You're good at this," she said suddenly. "The work, teaching." She met his eyes. "You explain things, like they matter. Like you want people to understand, not just get the job done. Everything matters," Tom replied simply. "That's what makes good work good." A comfortable silence fell between them as they worked together, Sarah helping to mark measurements while Tom made the cuts. The morning passed quickly, punctuated by quiet explanations and the occasional shared laugh over Sarah's attempts to use tools that were clearly foreign to her hands. Around noon, Sarah's phone rang again. This time, her face showed real concern. When she checked the screen, "I have to take this," she said, hurrying outside. Through the window, Tom could see her gesturing emphatically, her entire demeanor transformed. Gone was the woman who'd been laughing at her own clumsiness with a hammer. In her place stood someone who radiated authority and power. The contrast was stark and somewhat unsettling. When she returned, her hands were shaking slightly. "I need to go," she said, gathering her things quickly. "There's a situation I have to handle." "Hey," Tom called softly, making her pause. "Everything okay?" Sarah stopped at the door, conflict clear on her face. "No," she admitted, "but it will be. I wish—" She trailed off, looking around the cabin, at their morning's work, at the coffee cups sitting side by side, at Tom's concerned expression. "I wish things were simpler." "They can be," Tom said. "Out here they are." She smiled sadly. "That's what makes this so hard." Before Tom could ask what she meant, she was gone, her car kicking up dust on the dirt road. Tom worked, later than usual that evening, trying not to worry about Sarah's abrupt departure. He told himself it wasn't his place to worry, that their relationship was purely professional. But as he finally set his tools aside, he had to admit that something had shifted between them. He found himself thinking about Mary, about how she would have understood his confusion. She'd always been better at reading people, at understanding the heart of things. "Sometimes," she used to say, The most valuable things we build aren't made of wood or stone. Sarah didn't return the next day or the day after. The cabin felt strangely empty without the sound of her typing or her curious questions. Tom worked steadily, but found himself pausing occasionally, expecting to hear her voice asking about some detail of the restoration. On the third morning, he discovered a note slipped under the door. Expensive paper, elegant handwriting. "I'm sorry for disappearing. Some things in my other life needed attention, but being away has made me realize something. The person I am at the cabin, with you, feels more real than the person I have to be everywhere else. I'll be back tomorrow. Save some restoration work for me?" Tom read the note twice, then carefully folded it and put it in his pocket. He understood what she meant about feeling real. Out here, stripped of his past success and failures, he felt more himself than he had in years. He turned back to his work, but found himself watching the road more often than usual, waiting for the sound of her car returning to the cabin that was slowly becoming more than just a restoration project for both of them. When Sarah returned, something had changed. She arrived wearing jeans that weren't designer and boots that looked actually meant for work. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face was free of makeup. She carried a grocery bag instead of her laptop. "I thought we could make lunch here today," she said, setting the bag on the kitchen counter. "Though I should warn you, I've never actually cooked anything more complicated than toast." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Never? Private chefs," she admitted, with a slight blush. "But I want to learn. Mary taught you to cook, didn't she? You mentioned that once." The fact that she remembered that casual comment touched him. "She did. Said every carpenter needs to know how to feed himself properly." He examined the grocery bag's contents. Sandwiches might be a good place to start. They worked side by side at the counter, Tom, showing her how to slice vegetables evenly. Sarah's knife skills were tentative at best, but her determination was endearing. When she finally assembled her first sandwich, she looked at it with the same pride she'd shown over her restoration work. "It's crooked," she laughed, "but it's mine. Best kind of lunch," Tom agreed. "Tastes better when you make it yourself." They ate on the porch, watching birds flit between the trees. Sarah seemed more relaxed than he'd ever seen her, though she kept checking her phone out of habit. "Tell me about your other life," Tom said suddenly. "Not the details, just what's it like?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Loud," she finally said. "Everything's urgent. Everyone wants something. There are meetings and deadlines and expectations. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a part in someone else's story. And here? She looked around at the forest, the half-restored cabin, the simple lunch they'd made together. "Here I'm just me, though I'm not entirely sure who that is anymore." After lunch they returned to work. Sarah had become surprisingly competent with basic tools, and Tom found himself teaching her more advanced techniques. She approached each task with intense focus, as if making up for years of never working with her hands. "My father would be horrified," she said, laughing, as she wiped sweat from her forehead. "He always said manual labor was beneath our family." "No honest work is beneath anyone," Tom replied, watching her carefully sand a section of banister. "Besides, you're getting pretty good at this. I have a good teacher." She paused, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "You know what's strange? I've bought and sold companies worth millions, but nothing feels quite as satisfying as restoring this old wood." Tom understood completely. Money can't buy this feeling, the satisfaction of creating something real, something that will last. They worked until sunset, Sarah insisting on finishing the entire banister before leaving. As she gathered her things to go, she seemed reluctant to leave. "I've postponed my meetings tomorrow," she said. "Thought I might spend the whole day here, if that's okay." "Your cabin," Tom reminded her, but they both knew it had become more than that. After she left, Tom sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, thinking about the day. Something about Sarah's eagerness to learn, her genuine joy in simple accomplishments, touched him deeply. She wasn't just playing at this life, she was discovering parts of herself she'd never known existed. He thought about his own journey, how losing everything had somehow led him here. Sometimes, he realized, you have to lose who you thought you were to discover who you could be. The next morning, he woke early to find Sarah already there, attempting to make coffee in the old percolator. The kitchen was a mess, coffee grounds scattered everywhere, but her triumphant smile when she handed him a cup made it all worth it. "It's terrible, isn't it?" she asked, watching him take a sip. "It's perfect," he lied, and somehow, in that moment, it was. The peaceful rhythm they'd established began to fracture on a Tuesday morning. Sarah arrived looking tense, her phone practically glued to her ear. She paced the porch, speaking in clipped tones about market shares and board meetings, while Tom worked inside trying not to eavesdrop, but catching fragments nonetheless. "No, we can't delay the merger. Yes, I understand the concerns. No, I need those numbers today, not tomorrow." Her voice carried authority that seemed at odds with the woman who'd been so proud of making coffee yesterday. When she finally ended the call, she slumped against the porch railing. "I'm sorry about that," she said as Tom approached. "Things are complicated right now." "Seems like more than just a small online business," he observed quietly. Sarah's face flickered with guilt. "Tom, Her phone rang again. This time, the caller ID photo flashed briefly before she could snatch it away. Sarah in an executive suit, speaking at what looked like a major corporate event. Tom caught a glimpse of a company logo he recognized from national news, but he said nothing. The day continued like this, their usual easy rhythm interrupted by constant calls and messages. Sarah tried to maintain her focus on their restoration work, but her mind was clearly elsewhere. She made mistakes she hadn't made in weeks, her hands unsteady with distraction. "Maybe we should call it a day," Tom suggested after she nearly hit her thumb with a hammer for the third time. "No," she said firmly. "No, I need this. I need—" She gestured at the cabin, frustration evident in her voice. "I need something real." But reality had other plans. Around noon, her phone rang again, and this time her face went pale as she read the message. "I have to go," she said, already gathering her things. "There's an emergency board meeting. Sarah," Tom called as she rushed toward the door. "Whatever you're involved in, whatever you're running from, you don't have to handle it alone." She paused, one hand on the doorframe. "You don't understand. If you knew who I really was—" "I know who you are," he said simply. "You're the woman who spent 3 hours learning to make coffee, who gets excited about sanding wood, who cares about this old cabin and its history." Tears glimmered in her eyes. "It's not that simple." "It could be," she shook her head. "No, it really couldn't." Then she was gone, her car kicking up dust on the drive. Tom worked late into the evening, trying to lose himself in the familiar motions of restoration. But his mind kept returning to the glimpses he'd caught of Sarah's other life, the corporate logo, the authority in her voice, the constant urgent calls. It all painted a picture very different from the simple cabin owner she claimed to be. He found himself in the kitchen, staring at the coffee maker she'd struggled with that morning. On impulse, he opened the cabinet above it, where she kept her personal items. A glossy business magazine had fallen behind the sugar canister. He pulled it out, and there she was, on the cover. The headline read, "Sarah Chen, the $1 billion CEO's secret struggle." The photo showed her in an expensive suit, looking every inch the powerful executive. The article was dated just 3 months ago. Tom sat heavily at the kitchen table, the magazine open before him. He could read it, learn everything about her real life. Instead, he carefully returned it to the cabinet. Some truths needed to be shared, not discovered. That night, as he lay in bed listening to the cabin's familiar creaks, he thought about trust and secrets, about masks and true faces. He understood why she'd hidden her identity. Hadn't he seen firsthand how people treated you differently once they knew your story? But something would have to give. The weight of her double life was clearly taking its toll, and sooner or later, The truth would demand to be heard. The question was, when it did, would it destroy everything they'd built here, or would it set them both free? Sarah's text arrived at dawn. Have to be in New York. Emergency merger negotiations. I'm so sorry. Please keep working on the cabin. We'll explain everything soon. Tom stared at the message on the basic phone she'd given him for work communications, feeling the weight of everything unsaid. He hadn't told her about finding the magazine, and she hadn't found the courage to tell him the truth. Now distance would force them both to confront what they'd been avoiding. He made coffee in the percolator, perfectly, unlike her endearingly terrible attempts, and took it to the porch. The morning felt different without the anticipation of her arrival. No expensive coffee delivery, no curious questions about the day's restoration plans, no laughter at her own clumsiness with tools. Still, there was work to be done. Tom threw himself into it with renewed intensity, letting the familiar motions of restoration fill the strange emptiness her absence left. He focused on the details she would have noticed. The grain of the wood, the precision of each cut, the history revealed in each restored piece. By the third day, the cabin felt eerily quiet. He'd grown used to the sound of her typing, her phone calls, even the urgent business ones, her questions about every aspect of the work. Now there was just the tap of his hammer, the rasp of his saw, the whisper of sandpaper on wood, her daily. Texts were brief, professional. Hope the work is going well. Any issues with supplies? He responded in kind, sending progress updates and supply requests, pretending this was just a normal business arrangement. But they both knew it had become far more than that. On the fourth day, curiosity got the better of him. He went into town and bought a newspaper, finding her name in the business section. The article painted a picture of high-stakes corporate drama, billion-dollar merger negotiations, competing interests, boardroom battles. The photo showed her in the corporate armor he'd never seen her wear. Designer suit, perfect makeup, confident. Smile. She looked powerful, untouchable, and somehow lonely. Back at the cabin, he ran his hand along the kitchen counter she'd helped sand. Remembered her triumphant smile when she'd finally gotten the technique right. That was real, he thought. The woman who found joy in simple accomplishments, who asked endless questions about wood grain and tool handles, who made terrible coffee with complete sincerity. That wasn't an act. That evening, his phone buzzed, with a different kind of message from her. Can't sleep, keep thinking about the cabin, about the peace there, about... The message ended abruptly, as if she'd lost courage. Tom replied after a long moment, "The cabin misses you too." It was the closest either of them had come to acknowledging what was growing between them. The phone stayed silent after that. But he imagined her in some luxury hotel room, reading his message, perhaps touching the calluses she'd earned from their work together. Days stretched into a week. Tom continued the restoration, but now he found himself adding special touches he knew she would appreciate. Carefully preserving the initials her grandmother had carved into a doorframe, salvaging pieces of the original wallpaper to frame, meticulously restoring the old bread box in the kitchen where she'd told him her grandmother used to keep cookies for her. He understood now, more than ever, why this place meant so much to her. In a world where she had to be Sarah Chen, the billion-dollar CEO, this cabin was the only place where she could just be Sarah, the woman who couldn't make coffee but tried anyway, the woman who got sawdust in her hair and didn't care, the woman who was finally learning who she might have been if life had taken a different turn. On the 8th day, he found another magazine in town with her company on the cover. The merger was complete, a multi-billion-dollar deal that would make headlines for weeks. The article praised her brilliant negotiation tactics, her strategic genius, her unstoppable drive. But all Tom could think about was her face when she'd successfully restored her first piece of wood, the pure joy of creating something with her own hands. He wondered if anyone in her corporate world had ever seen that side of her, If they knew the woman who hummed while she sanded, who asked endless questions about everything, who found peace in the simple act of making something broken whole. Again, he sent her one last text before bed. Remember what you said about feeling real here? That's because you are. The sound of tires on gravel woke Tom before dawn. He'd been sleeping lighter since Sarah left, part of him always waiting for her return. Through the window, he saw her familiar car, but the woman who stepped out was a stranger. Designer suit, perfect hair, stiletto heels completely unsuited for the cabin's rough ground. Sarah Chen, CEO, had finally arrived at her cabin. She stood in the pre-dawn light, looking lost in her own property, the weight of her other life visible in every line of her body. When she looked up and saw him watching from the window, she didn't wave or smile. Instead, she held up a newspaper, the same one he'd seen in town, with her face on the business page. "I guess we need to talk," she called softly. Tom made coffee while she changed out of her corporate armor. When she returned to the kitchen, wearing her familiar work clothes, she looked more like his Sarah, except for the tension in her shoulders and the worry in her eyes. "I should have told you sooner," she began, accepting the coffee cup he offered. "About being one of the most powerful CEOs in the country." Tom kept his voice neutral. "About the billions of dollars. Or about why someone like you would hire a homeless man to restore an old cabin." Sarah flinched at his directness. "All of it. But I was afraid this would change everything. It doesn't have to, doesn't it?" She stood, pacing the kitchen they'd restored together. "Do you know what the board would say if they knew their CEO was spending weeks doing manual labor? What the shareholders would think if they knew I was hiding out here instead of being in the office? What the press would do with this story?" "I don't care about them," Tom said quietly. "I care about why you felt you had to lie to me." Sarah stopped pacing, tears in her eyes. "Because this is the only place where I'm not Sarah Chen, CEO. Where I'm not the woman who closes billion-dollar deals or makes headlines. Here, I'm just Sarah, the woman who can't make coffee, who gets excited about fixing old wood, who's real," Tom finished for her. "Yes." She sank back into her chair. "My whole life, I've been what others expected me to be. My father's perfect daughter, the corporate prodigy, the ruthless CEO. But here, with you," she touched the calluses on her hands, earned from weeks of work. "Here I discovered who I might have been if I'd had the courage to choose my own path." Tom considered her words carefully. "You know, when I lost everything, I thought that was the end. My business, my home, my identity, all gone. But out here I found something I'd forgotten. The joy of working with my hands, of creating something real, of being valued for what I can do, not what I own. That's what you gave me too," Sarah whispered. "A chance to be valued for something real. So why are you here now? Why tell me the truth?" Sarah pulled out her phone, showing him a series of news headlines. "The merger's complete. It was successful. More successful than anyone expected. The board wants to expand operations, move into new markets. They want me to relocate to New York permanently." The words hung in the air between them. Tom felt the weight of them, the impending end of their simple life at the cabin. "And what do you want?" he asked finally. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the half-restored cabin and the peaceful woods beyond. "For the first time in my life, I don't want what I'm supposed to want. Success, power, expansion, it all feels hollow compared to what I've found here." She turned back to face him, and in her eyes he saw both the powerful CEO and the woman who'd found joy in sanding wood. "I had to tell you the truth because I need to make a choice, and I couldn't do that without being honest with you and with myself." The morning light streamed through the windows they'd restored together, casting patterns on the floor they'd rebuilt side by side. In that moment, Tom saw their worlds colliding, his simple craftsmanship and her corporate empire, his homelessness and her billions, his honesty and her necessary lies. Yet somehow, in this cabin, they'd found common ground. "So what happens now?" he asked. Sarah squared her shoulders, and he saw the CEO's strength blend with the carpenter's apprentice's determination. "That depends on whether you can forgive me for not telling you the truth sooner, and," she hesitated, "whether you're willing to help me figure out what comes next." The days following Sarah's revelation carried a different weight. Tom threw himself into his work with an intensity that spoke of his inner turmoil, while Sarah split her time between urgent video calls in her car and awkward attempts to return to their easy routine of restoration work. "You're holding the sander wrong," Tom said one afternoon, his voice more distant than it had ever been. "You know better than that." Sarah adjusted her grip without meeting his eyes. The calluses on her hands were fading after her week in New York, and somehow that small detail hurt more than the tension between them. "I'm sorry," she said, and they both knew she wasn't talking about the sander. "You keep saying that." Tom moved to the window frame he'd been restoring. "But I'm not sure what you're sorry for anymore. Lying about who you are, being who you are, or maybe for making me—" He stopped himself, focusing intently on his work. "Making you what?" Sarah set down her tools, facing him directly. "Making me believe that this was real." His voice was quiet but firm. "That we were just two people restoring an old cabin. That the woman who couldn't make coffee but tried anyway, who got excited about learning to use a level, who shared stories about her grandmother, that she was real." "She is real," Sarah insisted. "More real than the CEO, more real than the billionaire who could buy 1,000 cabins like this." Tom's hands stilled on the wood. "The woman who probably has teams of contractors she could hire instead of picking up a homeless man from outside a diner. That's not fair." Sarah stepped closer. "You know that's not what this was about." "Do I?" Tom finally turned to face her. "Because from where I'm standing, I'm not sure I know anything anymore. Was this some kind of social experiment, slumming it with the common folk, learning how the other half lives?" The pain in his voice cut through Sarah's defenses. "No," she whispered. "This was me finding myself, finding something real in a life that's been about appearances for so long. Finding—" She hesitated. "Finding someone who saw me, not my bank account or my company's stock price." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. Outside, a storm was brewing, dark clouds gathering above the trees. The cabin creaked around them, as if responding to the tension within its walls. "You know what the hardest part is?" Tom finally spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "I understand why you did it, why you needed this place, this secret life. I understand because this cabin gave me the same thing. A chance to be valued for my skills, my knowledge, my work. Not judged for being homeless or seeing pity in people's eyes." Lightning flashed outside, followed by distant thunder. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. "What do we do now?" "Now?" Tom picked up his sander again. "Now we finish what we started. This cabin still needs work, and whether you're Sarah Chen, CEO, or just Sarah who can't make coffee, you still need to learn the proper way to restore these floors." It wasn't forgiveness, not quite, but it was something. Sarah picked up her own tools, adjusting her grip the way he'd taught her weeks ago. They worked in silence as the storm drew closer, each lost in their own thoughts. When the rain finally broke, drumming against the roof they'd repaired together, Sarah spoke softly. "The woman who can't make coffee but tries anyway? Who gets excited about learning to use a level? Who remembers her grandmother every time she walks through this door?" She waited until Tom looked at her. "She's not going anywhere. She's not some character I played. She's who I am when I'm allowed to just be me." Tom nodded slowly, his hands moving steadily over the wood. "Then prove it," he said simply. "Not to me, to yourself." The rain continued to fall as they worked. Side by side, the distance between them still present but somehow less absolute. Sometimes, they both knew, the hardest repairs aren't made to wood or stone, but to trust that's been damaged and hope that's been shaken. The storm that had been threatening for days finally hit with unprecedented force. Rain lashed against the windows as wind howled through the trees, testing every repair they'd made to the cabin. Tom and Sarah stood at different windows, watching. The darkness descend hours before sunset. "That doesn't look good," Sarah said, pointing to where water was beginning to pool dangerously close to the foundation. Her phone buzzed, another business crisis demanding attention, but for once she ignored it completely. Tom was already moving, grabbing tools and emergency supplies. "The drainage system we installed last week won't hold against this. We need to dig a trench before the water reaches the basement." Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed a shovel. "Tell me what to do." They worked in the driving rain, their previous tension forgotten in the face of urgent necessity. Sarah's designer rain boots quickly filled with mud as she dug alongside Tom, following his instructions without question. The CEO was gone. This was the Sarah who had learned to trust his expertise, who understood the value of hard work. "More to the left," Tom shouted over the storm. "We need to redirect the flow away from the corner." A crack of lightning illuminated the scene, followed immediately by deafening thunder. In that brief flash, they saw a massive oak tree at the edge of the property swaying dangerously. "The root system must be compromised," Tom said urgently. If that falls, he didn't need to finish. They both knew the tree could destroy months of their work in seconds. Without discussing it, they moved as one toward the threatened area, carrying lumber and rope from their supplies. "We can try to brace it," Tom explained quickly, showing Sarah how to position the supports. "It won't save the tree long term, but it might get us through the night." Sarah worked with focused intensity, her soaked hair plastered to her face. "Like this?" she asked, securing a rope exactly as he'd taught her weeks ago. "Perfect," he nodded, and for a moment it was like nothing had changed between them. The wind intensified, and they heard an ominous crack from above. Tom grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her back just as a large branch crashed down where she'd been. Standing, they stood frozen for a moment, her hand gripping his arm, both breathing heavily. The physical contact, the first since her return, sparked something neither was ready to address. "Thank you," she said softly, but didn't move away. Another thunderous crack split the air. The tree was losing its battle with the storm despite their efforts. They watched in helpless frustration as their bracing began to fail. "We need more supplies," Tom said, already moving toward the tool shed. "If we can just—" "Tom, stop!" Sarah's voice held the same authority she used in board meetings, but now tinged with genuine fear. "It's too dangerous. We have to let it go." "Let it go?" He turned back to her, rain streaming down his face. "Like you're letting go of the cabin? Running off to New York to be the perfect CEO? That's not fair, isn't it? You're ready to abandon everything we've built here." "Built?" Sarah stepped closer, her eyes flashing. "What exactly have we built, Tom? A fantasy? A beautiful lie where I'm not a CEO and you're not homeless?" He finished for her. "Is that what this was about? Fixing up the broken man along with the broken cabin? No, this was about—" She stopped, watching in horror, as the tree finally gave way with a thunderous crash. They moved in perfect synchronization, years of their respective experiences taking over. Tom's carpenter's eye and Sarah's executive decision-making merged as they quickly assessed the damage and took action. Working together, they managed to secure the area and prevent the fallen tree from damaging the cabin itself. Hours later, soaked and exhausted, they stood in the kitchen. The storm still raged outside, but the immediate danger had passed. Sarah made coffee, still terrible but somehow perfect for the moment. "You're bleeding," Tom noticed, reaching for her hand before he could stop himself. "So are you," she replied, softly, not pulling away as he examined the scratch on her palm. The quiet moment stretched between them, filled with everything they'd been afraid to say. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "I've never felt more alive than I did tonight," she admitted. "Out there in the storm, trying to save this place. It wasn't about being a CEO or homeless or any of the labels we're trying to escape. It was just about two people who care about something worth saving." Tom's hands stilled on hers. The cabin, not just the cabin. She met his eyes steadily. And you know it. Dawn broke over the aftermath of the storm, painting the wet woods in shades of gold and amber. Tom and Sarah sat on the porch steps, shoulders nearly touching, sharing their morning coffee. For once, Tom had let Sarah make his cup too, accepting. The too strong brew without comment. "We should assess the damage," Sarah said, but made no move to get up. Her clothes from yesterday were still damp, her hair a mess, yet she seemed more at peace than she had since returning from New York. "Already did," Tom replied. "First light. The tree did minimal damage, mostly superficial. We got lucky." Sarah turned to look at him. "You've been up for hours, haven't you? Still keeping homeless hours?" The question could have been awkward, but her tone held no judgment, only understanding. Tom found himself answering honestly. "Old habits. When you live on the streets, dawn and dusk are the safest times to move around. Guess some patterns stick with you, like checking your phone every 5 minutes for market updates." Sarah held up her device, which she'd finally silenced. "Or wearing clothes that cost more than some cars, because you never know who you might run into." "We all have our armor," Tom observed, looking at her borrowed flannel shirt and mud-stained jeans. "And our disguises. That's just it, though." Sarah set her coffee down, turning to face him fully. "Out here, in these clothes, covered in mud and failing at making coffee. This isn't a disguise. This is me without armor, the real me, and the CEO. She's real too, just a different kind of real. Like you're both the skilled carpenter who taught me everything I know about restoration and the man who lost everything but kept his dignity and expertise." Tom considered this. "We're not our circumstances." "No," Sarah agreed, "we're not. Last night proved that. When that tree was falling, when we were fighting to save this place, none of the labels mattered. Rich, poor, CEO, homeless. It all disappeared. Because we were just two people who cared about something worth saving." Tom quoted her words from last night. "I meant it, you know." Sarah's voice was soft but sure. "Not just about the cabin." Tom stood, walking to the fallen tree. Sarah followed, watching as he ran his hands over the exposed roots. "We could mill this," he said thoughtfully. "The wood's still good. Could be beautiful, actually. Custom furniture, maybe some special details for the cabin. Making something. New from what was broken?" Sarah stepped closer. "That seems appropriate." "It's what we do here," Tom replied, and they both knew he wasn't just talking about woodwork. Sarah touched the tree trunk beside his hand. "I have to go back to New York next week. The board meeting." "I know, but I've been thinking." She took a deep breath. "What if we turned this place into something more? Not just a private retreat, but a restoration center. A place where people could learn traditional crafts, where skills like yours wouldn't be lost, where people could find the same peace and purpose I found here." Tom turned to her, surprised. "That's not a small undertaking. Neither was fixing this cabin, but we did it. Well, we're doing it." She smiled. "I have the resources, you have the knowledge. Together." "Together," Tom repeated, testing the word. "You're serious about this? Last night showed me something. In the corporate world, I move billions of dollars around, make decisions that affect thousands of lives. But out here, working with my hands, actually creating something tangible, this feels more meaningful than any deal I've ever closed." She gestured at the fallen tree. "So yes, let's mill it. Let's make something beautiful from what nature knocked down. And then let's think bigger, about what else we could build here." Tom was quiet for a long moment, his hands still on the tree trunk. Finally, he spoke. "Mary used to say that sometimes you have to lose your way to find your path." Wise woman. "Yeah, she was." He turned to Sarah with a slight smile. "So this restoration center, where do we start?" Sarah's face lit up with the same enthusiasm she'd shown when learning to use a level for the first time. "Well, first we need to save this tree. Then maybe we can talk about it over coffee." "You're not making the coffee," Tom said firmly. But his eyes were warm, As they walked back to the cabin together, the morning sun caught the water droplets still clinging to the trees, making everything sparkle like new. Sometimes they both knew the strongest foundations are built after the storm passes. The next few days brought changes as natural as the seasons. Sarah set up a proper office in one corner of the living room, not hidden away, but integrated into the cabin's restored beauty. Her laptop sat on a desk Tom had crafted from salvaged wood, the old and new coexisting in perfect harmony. They'd developed a new rhythm. Mornings were for restoration work, with Sarah still insisting on learning and participating despite her upcoming board meetings. Afternoons often found her on video calls, but now she didn't hide her surroundings. More than once, Tom overheard her explaining the sound of sawing or hammering to curious executives. "Yes, that's construction noise," she said during one call, catching Tom's eye and smiling. "I'm overseeing a restoration project that's very important to the future of our community outreach program." After her calls, she'd return to their work with renewed energy. "The board's intrigued," she told Tom as they worked on milling the fallen oak. "They think a corporate retreat focused on traditional crafts and restoration could be revolutionary. Something about getting back to basics and real values." Tom guided her hands on the wood. "And what do you think?" "I think they're missing the point," she said, focused on the grain pattern emerging under their work. "This isn't about corporate retreats or team building. It's about remembering what it means to create something real." The transformation wasn't just in their plans. Tom noticed Sarah carrying herself differently, more integrated, as if the CEO and the apprentice carpenter had finally found a way to coexist. She still wore expensive clothes to her video meetings, but now she kept her work boots by the door with an equal sense of ownership. One evening, as they sat on the porch reviewing plans for the restoration center, Sarah noticed Tom looking unusually thoughtful. "What is it?" she asked. "Mary would have loved this place," he said quietly. "Not just the cabin, but what we're planning to do with it. She always said everyone deserves a chance to rebuild." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Tell me more about her." For the first time, Tom found he could talk about Mary without the sharp edge of grief. He told Sarah about their early days, working side by side in their first small workshop, about Mary's insistence that they train young apprentices, give opportunities to those who needed them most. "That's what we'll do here," Sarah said when he finished. "We'll honor her legacy by creating those same opportunities." The next morning, Sarah arrived with unexpected news. "I've been restructuring my role at the company," she announced, "promoting some key people, delegating more day-to-day operations. The board's approved my proposal to focus on developing this restoration center as our flagship community impact project." Tom looked up from his work. "You're sure about this?" "For the first time in my life, yes." She picked up her tools with practiced ease. "I don't have to choose between my worlds anymore. I can be the CEO who knows the value of working with her hands, who understands that true wealth isn't just about money." They worked together through the morning, the familiar motions now smooth with practice. Sarah's hands were sure on the tools, her understanding of the wood's properties now intuitive rather than learned. "You know," Tom said as they stepped back to admire their progress, "when you first hired me, I thought I was just restoring a cabin." Sarah smiled, understanding his meaning. Instead, we both found something that needed restoration. Purpose. Balance, a sense of who we really are. The afternoon sun streamed through windows they'd restored together, casting warm light on the life they were building. Not just the physical structure, but the future they were crafting from the broken pieces of their past. Like the fallen oak, they'd transformed into something new and beautiful. They too had been transformed by the simple act of creating something authentic together. Sarah arrived one morning with a thick folder tucked under her arm, her expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. She dressed in what Tom had come to think of as her hybrid style. Expensive jeans paired with work boots, a silk blouse under a practical work jacket. I need to show you something, she said, spreading documents across their makeshift planning table. Another piece they'd crafted from the fallen oak. I've been working on this for weeks, Tom recognized. Architectural drawings, business plans, and legal documents. At the center was a beautifully rendered illustration of the cabin and its surrounding property, expanded into something grander, but still true to its humble origins. The Sarah Chen Center for Restoration Arts. He read from the header, then looked at her questioningly. No, she said quickly, that's just a placeholder. I was thinking the Mary Williams Center for Restoration Arts. She watched his face carefully. If you approve, of course. Tom stared at the plans, emotion catching in his throat. The proposal showed training workshops, apprenticeship programs, residential spaces for students, all centered around the original cabin. This is bigger than just corporate retreats, he finally managed. Much bigger. Sarah's eyes were bright with enthusiasm. Yes, we'll host corporate programs. That's how we'll fund the real mission. But the heart of it will be a school for traditional crafts, focusing on people who need a second chance. Veterans, people recovering from addiction, those who've lost everything and need to rebuild, she paused. People like you were. And who's going to run all this? We are. She met his eyes steadily, as equal partners. I'll handle the business side, but you'll be the heart of it. Master craftsman, lead instructor, director of restoration programs. Your experience, both professional and personal, makes you perfect for this. Tom walked to the window, looking out at the property. In his mind's eye, he could see it. Workshops filled with students, learning the satisfaction of creating something with their own hands. People discovering their worth through craft and dedication. It's a beautiful dream, he said quietly. Not a dream. Sarah moved to stand beside him. I have the resources to make it happen. You have the skills and wisdom to make it work. Together, she hesitated. Together, we could create something meaningful, something that would last. Partners, Tom repeated, turning to face her. You know what people will say about a billionaire CEO partnering with a master craftsman who understands the true value of restoration, Sarah interrupted. Who taught me more about authentic leadership in 3 months than I learned in 15 years of corporate life? She picked up another document from the table. This is the formal partnership agreement. Equal say in all decisions. Your expertise valued as highly as my investment. I've had the best lawyers in the country work on it. Tom took the agreement, reading carefully. Years of business experience, followed by bitter lessons about losing everything, had taught him to be thorough. You're serious about this? Completely. Sarah's voice was firm. But it has to be your choice. If you want to walk away, the cabin is yours. Consider it payment for the restoration work. You can do whatever you want with it. Tom looked around at what they'd created together. Not just the restored cabin, but the sense of purpose they'd both found here. He thought about Mary, about her belief in second chances and the power of creating something meaningful. You know, he said slowly, Mary used to say that true craftsmanship isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about making something stronger in the broken places. Sarah held her breath, waiting. I'll need time to review all this properly, he continued. Make sure everything's clear, of course. Sarah tried to hide her disappointment at what she thought was hesitation. But Tom smiled slightly. I think Mary would have loved this plan almost as much as I do. Sarah's face lit up with understanding. So you'll... Yes. Tom held out his hand, then laughed as Sarah ignored it and hugged him instead. Yes, I'll be your partner in this crazy venture. They spent the rest of the day poring over plans, Tom's practical experience refining Sarah's grand vision into something even more meaningful. As the sun set, they stood on the porch, looking out at the land that would soon transform lives, just as it had transformed theirs. Think we can do this? Sarah asked. Tom thought about second chances, about restoration, about the power of believing in something bigger than yourself. Together, yes, I think we can. The final weeks of the cabin's restoration took on a bittersweet quality. Each completed task brought them closer to the end of what had become a transformative journey for both of them. They worked with renewed purpose, knowing that every repair now laid the foundation for something larger than themselves. "Remember when you couldn't tell a level from a pry bar?" Tom teased, as he watched Sarah perfectly install the last piece of restored crown molding in the living room. Her technique was flawless, a testament to how far she'd come. "Remember when you thought I was just a weird rich woman with a run-down cabin?" she countered, stepping back to admire her work. "Now look at us, planning to teach others everything. We learned here." They developed an easy rhythm, moving around each other with the familiarity of long-time partners. Sarah no longer needed instruction for basic tasks, and Tom had grown comfortable with her corporate side, often contributing valuable insights during her planning calls. The town had noticed the changes too. Local suppliers who'd once gossiped about the mysterious woman and her homeless handyman now treated them with curious respect. Word had gotten out about their plans for the restoration center, and applications were already coming in from potential students and instructors. "Got another call from the Historical Society today," Sarah mentioned as they shared lunch on the porch. She'd finally mastered the art of making decent coffee. "They're interested in documenting the cabin's restoration as a model for future projects." Tom nodded, unsurprised. They'd done something special here, preserving not just the structure but its soul. Every repair had been made with an eye toward honoring the original craftsmanship while preparing the building for its new purpose. "We should give them a tour," he suggested. "Show them how we integrated modern updates without compromising the historical elements. Could be useful for the teaching program." Sarah smiled at his use of "we" and "teaching program." Such a natural evolution from their early days of uncertainty and hidden identities. That afternoon, they tackled the final, major task, installing the handcrafted sign that would hang over the entrance. They'd made it together from the fallen oak, combining Tom's masterful woodworking with Sarah's eye for design. The Mary Williams Center for Restoration Arts was carved in elegant letters, with a smaller line beneath reading, "Where broken things find new purpose." As they raised the sign into place, Sarah noticed Tom's hands trembling slightly. "She would have been so proud," she said softly. "Yes," he agreed, touching the carved letters of his late wife's name. "Not just of the sign or the center, but of what we're trying to do here, giving people the same chance she always believed everyone deserved." They stood back to admire their work, not just the sign, but the fully restored cabin behind it. The worn-down structure that had first greeted them was now a testament to the power of dedication and craftsmanship. Every window gleamed, every board stood true, every detail spoke of care and attention. "Hard to believe this is the same place," Sarah mused, remembering her first view of the dilapidated building. "It's not," Tom replied thoughtfully. "Just like we're not the same people who started this project. Sometimes restoration changes more than just the surface." The sunset painted the cabin in warm light, highlighting all they'd accomplished. The restored porch where Sarah had learned to sand wood, the windows they'd carefully rebuilt together, the new workshop area they'd added for future classes, each element told part of their story. A car pulled up the drive, the first of several. Board members arriving for tomorrow's official opening tours. Sarah straightened, ready to step into her CEO role, but her hand found Tom's first. "Ready for this?" she asked. Tom squeezed her hand, both of them covered in the honest dirt of their day's work. Together, always. The morning of the center's opening dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself was celebrating with them. Tom watched the sunrise from his new apartment above the workshop, a space he and Sarah had designed together, combining comfort with craftsman's styling. The sound of cars arriving floated up from below, a reminder that their private sanctuary was about to become something bigger. Sarah found him in the workshop, already running his hands over the teaching stations they'd built. She was dressed in what had become her signature style, elegant but practical, equally ready for board meetings or woodworking demonstrations. "The first students arrive next week," she said, checking her notes. "Veterans, a former executive who lost everything in the crash, 2 women from the homeless shelter downtown, just like we planned. And the corporate retreat folks?" Tom asked, adjusting tools at each station with careful precision. "Next month. Though half of them are actually asking for the full program now, not just the weekend experience. Seems there are a lot of people looking to find what we found here." They walked together through the expanded property. The original cabin remained the heart of it all. But now, additional buildings spread organically through the woods. Workshops, student housing, a communal dining hall. Everything built with the same attention to craft and authenticity that had marked their first project. The opening ceremony was simple but meaningful. Sarah spoke first, every inch the confident CEO, but her words carried a new weight of experience. "When I first bought this cabin, I was looking for an escape. What I found instead was a path forward. In seeking to restore this building, I discovered parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. And in hiring a master craftsman who happened to be homeless, I learned that true worth isn't measured by what we own, but by what we can create, teach, and share with others." She gestured to Tom, who stepped forward. Looking out at the gathered crowd, corporate board members in expensive suits mingling with local craftspeople in work clothes, he saw a reflection of his own journey. "My late wife Mary used to say that everyone deserves a chance to rebuild. This center is dedicated to that belief. Here, we don't just teach craft, we teach hope. We show that with the right tools, the right guidance, and the right opportunity, anything can be restored to new purpose and beauty." The tours that followed were a blur of introductions and explanations. Tom and Sarah moved through the crowds together, completing each other's sentences as they explained their vision. The local press seemed especially fascinated by their partnership. The billionaire CEO and the formerly homeless craftsman who'd created something unprecedented together. Late that afternoon, as the last visitors departed, they returned to their favorite spot on the cabin's porch. Sarah made coffee, perfect now, after months of practice, and they sat in comfortable silence. "Quite a change from that first day at Eddie's diner," Tom mused. "When I was secretly watching you fix his door," Sarah smiled. "I knew then you were exactly who I needed, though I didn't understand why yet. And I thought you were just a kind woman with a cabin." He chuckled. "We've come a long way." "We still have a long way to go," Sarah said, looking out at their creation. "This is just the beginning." As if to emphasize her words, a truck pulled into the drive, their first delivery of lumber for next week's classes. The driver, who'd been supplying them throughout the cabin's restoration, waved in recognition. "Ready to get back to work?" Tom asked, standing and offering Sarah his hand. She took it, both their palms calloused now from honest labor. "Always. We have a lot more restoration to do, of buildings, of lives of hope." Together they walked toward the truck, their shadows merging in the late afternoon light. Behind them stood the cabin where their journey had begun, its restored beauty a testament to the power of second chances. Before them stretched a future neither could have imagined that first day at Eddie's diner, a future they would build together, one restored piece at a time.